The return of European paganism may sound shocking and far-fetched. After all, most Westerners probably don't even know any European pagans. But in this video, I'm going to explain to you why it is certain that European paganism will make a comeback and may even end up being the majority religion in some Western countries. In an increasingly globalized world and with the pressures of mass migration, Europeans are feeling the need to rediscover their identity. And the most recent European identity was Christianity. So many people are trying to return to Christian traditionalism. But the problem with Christianity is that it is fundamentally a universalist religion, a universalist identity. So if it is to serve as a new identity for Westerners, a reforged identity for Westerners, then it has to be paired with something else. Some Christians on the right will seek to pair Christianity with nationalism or ethno-nationalism, but in this case, then, it is the nationalism which is serving as the foundation of their identity rather than the Christianity, since the Christianity is universalist and open to anyone, but their nation is not, so their nation is the source of their exclusive identity. So while Christianity may be the most recent European identity, it is unstable because of its universalism. Additionally, whatever new paradigm forms out of the current turmoil which is occurring in the West will have to be able to resist liberalism and leftism. As the current liberal paradigm breaks apart for various reasons which I've talked about in other videos, a new paradigm, a new ethos, a new worldview will rise in the West to replace it. But this worldview will have to prove itself strong enough to supplant liberalism, to supplant the current collapsing paradigm. And the problem with Christianity is that it shares many of the same presuppositions as liberalism. What we have seen in the West is that liberals cannot resist leftists, since leftists take liberal presuppositions and run with them to their extreme. A leftist can always take a liberal's liberal principles and say, you're not being liberal enough, you have to be more liberal. And the liberal could argue, well, no, we have to be liberal in moderation, we have to moderate our values. But this is never going to be a convincing argument, because the leftist will always appear as the more sincere, the more liberal, and therefore they will always pull the liberals to the left. Despite what you might hear from mainstream conservatives, liberals do not actually have different first principles than leftists. They just disagree on the degree, the extremity to which these values are taken. And Christianity shares many of the same presuppositions as liberalism. As I've talked about in other videos, the liberal paradigm was actually built on Christian values and a Christian understanding of the world. So it's going to be very hard for a Christian worldview to supplant liberalism in the same way as it is very hard for liberalism to resist leftism. Liberals and leftists will always be able to accuse Christians of not being sincere to their own values, and thereby draw them left and pull them into the current paradigm which is collapsing. If a conservative who is a Christian or just a philosophical liberal argues for strong border security, it is very easy for a leftist to take their own beliefs and use them to destroy their stance. They can say, well, don't you believe in equality? Don't you believe in compassion for the downtrodden? Don't you believe in a society which is open to all, not one which is exclusive and closed off? And the Christian or liberal will have to say, yes, we agree with these things fundamentally, but just not in this case. We need moderation, there are conditions on these things, and that will always put them on the back foot. European paganism, however, as a philosophy and an identity, easily avoids all of this. It's an identity which seamlessly merges historical identity, values, religion, culture, peoplehood, literature, history. It is a natural form of identity, the type of identity which has been common throughout history among all peoples. It avoids all of the problems of an abstracted philosophical identity. Every abstract identity tried so far has caused distress or failed, whether it's liberalism, Christianity, or communism. When an identity, a philosophy, becomes too abstract and too universal, then it ceases to represent anything specific and therefore to represent anything at all. But pagan identity is concrete. It is an identity rooted in a specific worldview which is tied to specific cultures, regions, peoples, and texts. While Westerners might originally find Christianity when they search for a traditional Western identity, if they poke around beneath the surface, they'll soon find that almost everything Western is pagan. Christianity was merely placed over the pagan structure of Western civilization. If you imagine that Western civilization is a giant building, a giant temple or cathedral built over thousands of years, at some point the gods inside of this temple were switched out for Christian gods, the decorations changed, the murals changed, and some of the later embellishments were Christian. But despite this Christian makeover, the walls, the foundations, the pillars remained pagan. Christianity certainly had an effect on Western civilization and on European identity, for example, the move towards Universalism, among other things. But this change didn't wipe clean everything that was before. Classical civilization and everything which we inherit from it is pagan. All of our languages are pagan and have pagan values built into them. In fact, when traditionalists make an appeal to Christian values, they're usually actually hearkening back to pagan values. What differentiates a tradcath from an evangelical neocon is really that the tradcath is appealing to pagan values and aesthetics. The traditional Catholic appeals to the warrior ethos, which comes from the pagan tradition, heroism, honor, and so on, to the pagan value of family, kinship, monogamy, and romance, traditional gender roles. All of this is inherited from the pre-Christian European cultures. This is because the tradcath is appealing to traditional Western heritage, which is pagan. Paganism also has the advantage of, while being ancient and traditional, feeling exciting, new, and refreshing. The recent revolution in genetics and in archaeology as well is allowing us to understand who we really are, to actually reconstruct the genetic and cultural history of Europe in a way which was unfathomable only a few years ago. Since the Middle Ages, it has been standard to trace Western identity and heritage back to the Bible and to the Middle East. Medieval authors would jump through hoops to try to find the origins of Europeans in the Bible, to say that they are the descendants of the sons of Noah and this sort of thing. And even today, people like Jordan Peterson desperately try to find the origins of pagan ideas like Republican and democratic forms of government, the idea of individual liberty, and so on in the Bible. But this is dishonest and therefore cannot be sustained. It is not true. It does not actually match history. What is beautiful about the revival of European paganism is that it brings with it an ancient and true traditionalism, but at the same time it is a breath of fresh air compared with the stale Christian conservatism pushed in the mainstream and the decay of liberalism and leftism. The values which are preserved for us in the texts, culture, languages, and history of the ancients, and now illuminated in new light by the fields of genetics and archaeology, feel, at least to me, both wonderfully refreshing and profoundly familiar and ancient. And in European paganism, we find a cohesive worldview which allows for new growth, but avoids the need to come up with some completely new paradigm to replace the current crumbling one, or some completely new invented identity. It is true that European paganism currently is not very organized, either ideologically or in terms of its religious organizations, but that merely points to me that we are at the beginning of a revival, of a renaissance of European paganism. People will often point to the cringy, online, leftist, Wiccan pagans to refute the pagan stance, but I think they are a minority. They are not represented, as far as I can tell, in most pagan organizations, and I don't think they're much of a threat since their ideology clearly conflicts with the pagan worldview. Their ideology cannot survive their source material, which they seek to use to promote it, and I think this is also what happened with many forms of traditional Christianity. Aside from that small cringy faction, I think most pagans generally agree on many things, but one could still point to the fact that they are a minority in number. However, this was also the case with Christianity when it began. It was fragmented and a minority religion. Paul's letters discuss various disputed theological issues like whether resurrection is true or whether circumcision should be followed and so on. It took a long time for Christianity to actually formalize and to organize. And I think the time is ripe for us to do just that with the pagan worldview. All of the various branches of European paganism, while involving the worship of sometimes different or diverging gods, share the same fundamental foundational worldview, the European pagan worldview. This worldview includes ideas about fate, beauty, nobility, heroism, honor, hospitality, kinship, family, nature, and the gods which are shared across Europe, from Greece to Norway. You see this worldview in Homer, and you see it in the Viking sagas, and you see it implicitly in all of the languages of Europe. And going forward, I'm going to spend more time trying to elucidate this worldview on my channel and bring it into modernity and make it relevant to modernity. I've also decided to change up my extra content offer. Instead of offering exclusive content, which on a whim covers a variety of different subjects, I'm going to make a course which takes you through heroic literature from start to finish, including a reading list, extra reading, essential reading, and in this course I'm going to trace the threads of this ancient European pagan worldview in the hopes of building the foundations of something new by investigating something ancient. I will begin this endeavor with Homer in my next exclusive content episode. And I'm also going to be releasing videos about this on my channel, but the more detailed educational stuff will be on my Substack. So if you're interested in that, you can find the link in the description. There's already a bunch of stuff up on there. Lately, I truly feel that we are on the verge of something great. This unique combination of a collapsing political and philosophical paradigm and a hunger in people for something new combined with a desire to learn about the past is the grounds, in my opinion, for a renaissance. And I hope that I can convince you of the same in your bodies and your hearts. For after a long silence, the gods at last speak to us again.
To purchase our new apparel or join the ARCS community and Substack, check the links in the description.